Hello, and welcome to the Move Standard, the official podcast of Move Physiotherapy, Move 360 Wildside Studios, hosted by myself, Alex Morrell. Some of you may not recognise that name. You may know me better as @Alex Morrell Physio on Instagram or social media. But Jackson Morrell, I actually did take my wife's name when we got married, and it's something that I'm very proud of. I consider her family my family. And this is, quite frankly, something that I have put off for a long period of time. Even this morning, I've messed around with different camera setups, what speaker, how I'm going to set the room up. And to be honest with you, it was just something that I needed to start, and I needed to iterate and improve as time goes on. I'm here at home. We live out in the countryside, and this is a little home office that I've got. It's not ideal, and probably part of the reason why I've put this off, but it's something I've wanted to do for at least 2 years, if not longer, and more recently I've appeared on a number of different podcasts, thoroughly enjoyed it. First and foremost, seen the value that it can provide a community and an audience, and that's something that I now want to replicate on a regular basis. The podcast is called The Move Standard. The reason for that, I went through lots of different iterations of what the name would be, but first and foremost, one of my founding beliefs, values, principles, whatever we want to think about it here as, is having high standards and setting a standard for myself, for the people in my immediate circle, whether that's friends, family, staff members, and leading by example. And that is something that I'm very passionate about and something that I put a lot of intent and effort into. Second to that, we have lots of different systems and processes within the company, within Move and the group and the ecosystem that set standards for whether it's your job role, your roles and responsibilities and your KPIs, or whether you're a client and we are testing you and trying to set standards and reach different standards. The other thing is it provides a more well-rounded description of what I want to do with this podcast, and that is one of the key things that I want to go through. This podcast isn't going to be solely around rehab, training, performance, strength work. It's also not going to solely be around business and entrepreneurship and building that. I want to do this podcast as a passion project, share my experiences, tell my story, teach through that, but then also speak to some very interesting people. I will have a host of different people on the podcast, whether that's my staff members. I'm going to try and convince even my wife to come on. Some of my clients who I get an unbelievable amount of value from. Also to experts in different areas, again, whether that's rehab, training, whether that's business and entrepreneurship. I want to do this selfishly to learn myself and for the enjoyment of doing that. But then also to provide a huge amount of value in topics that I'm interested in personally. So I do hope you enjoy. I'm not sure what the lingo is for a podcast host. If you're listening to this on YouTube or Spotify, any shares, any support, any subscriptions, I believe downloads help. I would be eternally grateful. I'm figuring this out, and any feedback would be greatly appreciated. So I'm locked and loaded. I have my nootropics, new tonic in hand. Drink of water, excuse any ers as we go through, but let's get into the podcast. And essentially what I want to use this podcast for, I'm not really sure how long it will be, is to tell my story. And I get a lot of questions on social media about how did you get to where you got to, what happened, like how did you get your job in sport, as a new grad, what would you do, as someone wanting to open a new business. And I just want to talk quite openly and raw about what's led to today, because I do believe it has a number of lessons in it which younger me would definitely benefit from it and definitely learn from. So let's kick things off. If we go all the way back to when I was between the ages of sort of 14 to 17, I had always played sport, always loved sport, always been quite talented, the same old story that most people say, but my sport was cricket. Absolutely lived and breathed it. Freddie Flintoff was obviously my hero, and I would play multiple times a day. I would play in the school team and then go and train on an evening and play in the under 13s if I was 13, but then also play for the under 15s, the under 17s, play on a weekend for the men's teams on a Saturday and a Sunday. I would train alongside that. And obviously at this stage, all I knew was enjoying sport and I want to do more of it. My parents aren't from a health and fitness background. My dad has always exercised and kept himself in great shape, but that doesn't mean he understands the principles of performance and recovery and all of those great things. Where I'm getting to with this is that, unfortunately, when I got to around the age of 16, I started struggling with my back and shin splints and lots of different problems, but the primary thing was my back. I was probably 6'2", 6'3" at the time. I'm 6'5" now. It's always something that surprises people when they meet me and they say, you're a lot taller than I thought you would be. And I was training hard. I would have probably been 80 to 85 kilos, so I didn't carry a huge amount of muscle mass, but I was big for my age, and I always have been big for my age. And unfortunately, my back, I suffered a stress fracture and I had a disc bulge. Went through all the different avenues within the NHS. I was seeing sports masseuses, sports therapists. I was seeing a physio. I remember distinctly going to see a physio in the fire station, which was absolutely brilliant because I actually wanted to be a fireman. That was what I grew up wanting to be, and applied for it, but was unsuccessful. That would have been a different life. And the overriding thing was that I could never get it right. My back would feel a little bit better because I'd had some treatment, I'd rested, and then I'd go back to try and train. And I knew nothing other than bowling as fast as I can and hitting the ball as far as I could. That was me. And I used to open the bowling for the first team from the age of 14, and that was who I was. It was my identity, and that's all I wanted to get back to. But because I wasn't able to solve it, I started to take more of an interest. And one of the big things then was bodybuilding.com. And I would be there reading blogs and watching videos and consuming endless amounts of content around all things health, fitness, performance. And there wasn't a huge amount of content for rehabbing injuries and things like that. But I just knew I enjoyed learning about the human body and how to make it better and how to improve mobility. And it really struck up a passion for me, and I started in the gym and I was consistent in the gym. And yes, my back improved. It never got to where I wanted it to be until I was sort of in my second and third years of uni, but by which point, unfortunately, I suffered with the yips, which is a breakdown in motor skill. I did my master's degree dissertation on it, and I still don't really understand why it happens, but there's a belief that it's a performance anxiety related disorder. It's a breakdown in motor function because of hyperstimulation. But either way, if you are interested and you know cricket is a 6-ball over, I once bowled a 28-ball over, and it was the most embarrassing part, probably the most embarrassing thing that's ever happened to me, because like I said, that was who I was. But anyway, I got into the gym and really started to enjoy the human body and problem solving. Like I was always good at maths and science, and I enjoyed the problem solving side of maths, and the two went together, and I was like, right, I'd quite like to be a physio, and I'd got some exposure to it. And then came A-levels, and I went to an all-boys school, loved it. It was very relaxed. We just played sport all the time, first thing in the morning, breaks, lunch break, after school, all the time. But then I went to a mixed-sex A-level, sixth form. And as you can imagine, my attention was pulled into different directions. Let's say it that way. My attendance suffered, my engagement suffered, and the thing that ultimately suffered was my grades. I was predicted at AAB, and I got CCD, and I had to retake every single module in both years of being in A-levels. And ultimately what that meant was that I wasn't able to get onto a physiotherapy undergraduate degree, which obviously was devastating. But the reason I have gone through this story is because now looking back, it's actually probably the best thing that has happened to me, and it has set me up far better than any regular physiotherapy pathway would have done, because I went and did a sports science and injury management degree. So there were modules in and around sports science, there were modules in strength and conditioning, there were injury management, which involved treatment and rehabilitation of different injuries. And that taught me the foundational principles of strength and conditioning and how to improve human performance. And my behaviours from A-level carried over, quite honestly, into the first year of university. My attendance was poor. I had to retake all of the modules again. And it taught me a lesson about application, let's put it that way. And it taught me what it would take to achieve the things that I wanted to achieve, because by this point I was just becoming embarrassed of feeling like I was failing time and time again, whether that was failing at cricket, failing in my A-levels. Because at GCSE, without trying, I did really well. And again, you look back and you reflect on these things and you see maybe some of the behaviours and traits that I have now and where they've come from. But ultimately, I went through that degree, did well, but the intention was always to get onto a physiotherapy master's. And what I did do from my second year onwards was I was lucky enough to find placements in different sporting environments. I only ever wanted to go and work in sport. I didn't have an ambition to go work in the NHS. I didn't want to go and do my rotations. I had no interest in respiratory neuro. I just wanted to be an MSK physio who worked in sport. That was my thing. That was who I wanted to be. That's how I wanted my life to look. It would give me options. I would be in environments with people I enjoyed being around. And I sought out different work experience options. And I remember emailing every single club in rugby league, every single club in rugby union, all the northern-based football clubs. And even if they could only offer me a morning and a couple of hours, an evening, I would drive and I would go. I remember for a period of 3 months, I was travelling from my home near Hull over to Warrington, which was over a 2-hour drive, to do massages in the morning and then coming back. It was like I just wanted to build relationships and make connections, and I was prepared to do the work that it would take to do that. And then successfully got onto postgraduate degree and master's degree in physiotherapy. And I absolutely loved doing it because I knew where it was going to get me to. I had no interest in neuro and respiratory, which probably came through. And again, it affected my attendance because by this point I'd been offered a part-time role as a student physio or a sports masseuse and sports rehab role, which was sort of 10 to 20 hours a week within a professional rugby league team. And I would rather go there than I would rather be in the respiratory or the neuro modules. And this isn't me recommending this, by the way. This is just my honest story of where I got to. And there was discussions around my attendance, my ability to complete the course because my attendance was too low. But then I would go on a placement, and whatever placement I was on, I had a community, a respiratory, 2 medical placements, an elective sport 1. No, I had 5. That was it. I've held up 6 fingers there. I had 5, and I always passed with the top grades, and I was left to work relatively autonomously because I think I can just work out quickly how to solve problems and put systems in place to go, right, well, this is the best workflow to complete this task as effectively as possible. And I had the trust of people to do that. Qualified, and I was lucky enough to maintain my job part-time in sport, and I became a private practice employee for Dave O'Sullivan. A lot of people will know him as the go-to physio. He has a mentorship both from a clinical and a business perspective. I think I was his second ever full-time staff member. And it was completely invaluable to me. It was right at the outset of him building the mentorships and structuring how he would educate other physios. But even to this day, he's the best physio that I've ever worked with, and probably the best mentor that I've had. Even though I was an employee, I would consider him a massive mentor in terms of how he thought, the behaviours, and he probably showed me really what high performance looks like as a physio or as a practitioner. Obviously, you can see when working in sport what high performance looks like as an athlete and what those behaviours look like. But he taught me how to act as a high performer as a practitioner in a sporting environment and in a private practice, and I'm eternally grateful for the foundations that I developed under his mentorship. And again, I love the sports side of it. I got the opportunity to be a head physio in a semi-professional rugby league team in the second tier of rugby league, as well as working in the other club and in the clinic. And after about a year, I became a bit lost with what was happening in the clinic. It wasn't where I wanted to go. I didn't buy into at that stage some of the business elements of it that I do now. And an opportunity to apply for the head physio of Yorkshire Carnegie, or if you are a rugby union fan, they used to be called Leeds Tykes, and I've reverted back to that now after they went into administration. And I was successful in getting that head physio role. I had 2 physios that worked underneath me and alongside me, and we had a squad of between 40 and 50 players. So it was a bit of a baptism of fire. I was exceptionally confident in terms of the physio and the rehab side of things, but in terms of running a department and the leadership skills and the managing up skills to the coaching team, I had absolutely no idea, and I had to learn very quickly, and I had to learn on the spot. But the one thing I was very aware of from the outset was that I was going to be judged on how many people can stay fit, how quickly they can return when they get injured, and how many people stay fit after they've returned after injury. And it forced me to build really, really robust rehab systems that, in my opinion, didn't just rehabilitate the athlete, but reconditioned them to return better than they were before, because their previous level of ability had failed to tolerate the demands of what was being challenged, or what the body was being challenged to complete. Of course, there's luck, there's contact injuries, but particularly with non-contact injuries, it was like, right, why has this happened? What is it within their current performance metrics, mobility, strength, power, control, coordination, whatever it is, conditioning, where are the gaps and how can we return that person better? And did a very good job. But Yorkshire Carnegie was sort of the little sister company, or the little sister team to Leeds Rhinos. We shared training facilities, but Leeds Rhinos had the pick of when they used them, which pitches they could use, when they were in the gym, and we sort of worked around them. And this was a period of time when Yorkshire Carnegie were on a bit of a downward spiral, but the opportunity to apply for the head of physiotherapy and rehabilitation at Leeds Rhinos became available. And I was approached by the head of medicine, who worked across both teams, and he said, I think it'd be a good thing for you to apply for. Fast forward a couple of months, and I was the head physio and head of rehabilitation for Leeds Rhinos, and now I felt like I was in the deep end, but exactly where I wanted to be, and I felt like I belonged by this point. I'd developed better leadership skills, I'd developed better systems, better communication in terms of, like I say, managing up to the coaching team and head coaches and board and everyone above there. And I absolutely loved it, and it just allowed me exposure to more injuries and more challenging conversations and situations and processes than I would have ever been exposed to if I'd have gone down a different route. And it allowed me to refine my systems from a rehab perspective, because ultimately, like I said earlier, you are judged on how quickly you can get someone back and how many people stay back when they return to performance, return to play. And we had a really fantastic team. Assistant physio was great, sports head of performance, even like the assistant coach, S&C coach, is now head of performance at, I've gone completely blank, North Queensland Cowboys. So he was a fantastic young practitioner. The head of nutrition is now head of nutrition for Arsenal. The sports scientists, they were now working in the FA. And we ultimately, where I'm getting to is we had a fantastic MDT, but we actually tracked data on everything. And we found out that based on time loss, injuries, and that means anyone that misses a training session or anyone misses a game, we reduced the burden of time lost by around £400,000 in a season, which is effectively, if I remember rightly, it's 4.5 players' average salary across a season, which from the previous years it's sort of blown out the water what they were achieving. And there's a lot of factors in that, like the people that came before me were fantastic practitioners, but it's a different squad. It might be an older squad, a different coaching team that do things differently. But for the time that we were there and that I was there, our systems were proven, and they stood the test of time. Because at a certain point in time, and the reason I note the money saved or the burden saved from a time loss perspective is that I used that to discuss my salary. And I was a relatively young head physio, but I also was aware that was one of the worst paid head physios in Super League. And I wanted to showcase what I could do and discuss my salary, and I'm happy to be open. I was on £40,000 a year, which for that role, in my opinion, is nothing. And I know now that role is £65,000 a year, because I think they'd always had the viewpoint that it was a privilege to work in that role and work for Leeds Rhinos. And by the way, this is not me slating them, because I absolutely loved every single minute of working there, and it gave me more than I could ever imagine. But I was like, well, I want more, like in terms of I want the recognition in a way. And COVID happened, and I was sat with one of my best mates who owns a gym in Harrogate, Pete, and I was explaining my frustrations and maybe the lack of recognition that I was feeling for the things that I was delivering. And it's not like I was wanting loads of money and feeling really greedy, but I hadn't had a pay rise for a couple of years, and it was just part of that process. And he said to me, "Oh, just and for context, I'd started seeing 2 or 3 people ad hoc outside of working in my sporting role from a private practice perspective." And he said, based on what you're sort of charging people at the moment, how many people would you have to see per week to cover your salary? And it was 14.5. And the light bulb sort of dropped, and it was like I was doing 45-minute appointments, so even if it was an hour, it's 14.5 clinical hours a week to make the same amount of money. And like I said, sport is demanding. They can demand anything of you at any time, in any place. You have to report there. You have to be at the games. As a physio in the off season, you think you've got downtime, but you've managed players all the way through to the end of the season, and they have the surgery, and then you go into the off season and you have to rehab their surgeries and get them back for pre-season as early as possible. And it's just there's no escape in a way, like especially we there was just 2 of us and we had a squad of 35, so it's not like you can take annual leave in the season. It is a really challenging environment to work in, and that was the thing that sparked me to start Move. Within the next year, like, we won a couple of competition and we did well in the league and made the playoffs, but I knew that I wanted to have a different experience, and I wanted to try something for myself. And quite honestly, the initial intention was to have freedom, earn the same amount of money but work half the amount, choose when I worked. And it was like 15 hours of clinical work, 5 hours of admin, 5 hours of marketing. I can do everything in 25 hours. And I can earn the same amount of money. Fast forward a year, and I'd moved out of the small corner room that I had in Pete's gym, which taught me a hell of a lot. It was too hot in summer, too cold in winter, but it meant that I could access a rehab space in the gym alongside working in that room, and I could do all of my testing. I could rehab people properly. I could coach them and train them, rather than just like your typical traditional banded exercises that will happen in a room, treatment heavy, passive modality heavy rehab approaches. Ultimately, my intention with Move was to deliver the same level of support, care and attention that a professional athlete got to the everyday person. And a year later, I'd outgrown that room, and I had the opportunity to go up onto Rudding Estate, where we still are now, in a room called the Heronry, which was just a studio room, probably 400 square foot. It was big enough for me to have a desk, a bed, and a squat rack, a few plates, a bike, and a treadmill. And it just allowed me to build my own little hub of health and performance, and started getting the valve kit, which I'm going to do a podcast in itself on, because it's probably the most invaluable thing that I've invested in from my business perspective, and a lot of people that I'm now mentoring and working with from a business perspective, I have to show them and map out why that investment is so fantastic, from both a clinical results perspective, but then also a business perspective. And Move just grew. The one thing I'd always done consistently was document things on Instagram and share results, and create a little bit of a flywheel of sort of creating awareness of the service through value driven content, showcasing client results. That would then get people to know, like, and trust me, whatever strategy from a sales perspective I used, whether it was an outbound and reaching out to them, or they were reaching out to me for help, moving them into services, and started working online and developed ultimately the Pro Recovery and Performance Plan, which is our all-encompassing, fully comprehensive rehab and training plan, where we become your physio, your rehab, all of your strength and conditioning work, all your mobility, lifestyle, etc., and give you the support and accountability for you to not just fix the pain, but have a very transformative experience and come out the other side significantly better, more confident, feeling, looking, moving better than ever. And things took off, quite honestly. I was doing 2 clinical days, 20 appointments in a week, so 10 appointments in those 2 days, and at its peak, I got to managing 70, I think it was 78, it was just shy of 80, online, one-to-one, fully individualised design, Pro Recovery clients. So doing everything for them, and I absolutely loved it. I probably at different times have chased the financial goal. And again, that's probably something that I will talk about on another podcast, but chased the financial goal and to my own detriment, let's say, ended up significantly burnt out, working all the time, having to manage the volume of clients that I got. And I had to employ. Well, I didn't have to employ. I could have reduced the numbers or structured the business in a different way, or look for some help. And I just put something out on Instagram, and I was lucky enough that Josh reached out, and through gritted teeth, I met him. And I say that not as a reflection of Josh, but because I was going to struggle to trust someone and bring them into my world and essentially hand over the quality of what I wanted to deliver and trust that onto someone else. But the thing that I had seen is, because I was oversubscribed, the quality of what I was delivering was dropping anyway. And I realised that the only way to overcome that and actually grow, because my vision had expanded from that 15 hours a week to building something special, and I needed to take that step. And again, fast forward, I think it was probably 9 months, I had Josh working full-time. I had my brother Elliot working full-time. He is a coach and doesn't work in coaching now, but he came in and did admin and coaching for us. And Jack Buss, I think by that point had come on full-time, definitely within that next year. And there was the 4 of us in that small unit, like passing ships in and out. And all I drove into them was quality of service, client experience, client results, quality of service, client experience, client results, because ultimately the two defining things in terms of building Move, in my opinion, has been client experience and client results, and everything else has taken care of itself. We've never spent any money on paid ads. Actually, yesterday was the first day I've ever recorded one for Move, because I want to look at, again, probably a different podcast, look at how effective they can be, and what that means in terms of potentially growing team and other locations in the future. But it's a ever-growing process from there. grounded in those two things. How do we optimize client experience? How do we optimize client results? And everything is centered around that. Over time, we've built out our values, our company values, which are educate, evolve, and excel. We look at those through the lens of us as ourselves, the individual, us as a team, and how we show up for our clients and what they can expect. I used to think that was a very fluffy exercise, but it's been one of the most revolutionary things that I've done for the business. We've opened a small group personal training gym, which in October 2025 reached capacity at 80 clients. The two coaches in there, Mike and Alice, are actually long-term clients that came from our pro recovery plan. And live and breathe everything that Move is about. And we've just employed our third coach. Now we've gone into a new space, and everything is just expanding, and it's beyond sort of this podcast, but it's in the last 2-3 weeks, the business has grown, and we've got to 50% capacity, if that makes sense. So the availability and the amount of people that we can now serve and impact has doubled. And that's a really exciting position to be in. We're bringing in a new team, and I could probably break down all of these different facets into individual podcasts, and I'd love to hear what you'd like to hear, and it's what direction to go in with it. But ultimately, I think from this podcast, and I've got some notes down in terms of like, what is Move? Ultimately, it's driven behind client experience and client results. And Move is about setting the standard from an industry-wide perspective of what we do from a physio and rehab perspective, now from a coaching side of things, Pilates and wellness, which we've introduced, and going from there really, and just growing. But I think we're half an hour in. The last notes I have down, who is this for? So for anyone serious about performing well, building a strong, confident, resilient body, for anyone, and we will do injury-specific podcasts, and I'll get the team on, and you can get to know them better, and they can showcase their skills. But basically, anybody that wants to live a life that is pain-free, and it's living life on your terms and performing at the highest possible lens, performing at the highest possible level through whatever lens that is. And that might be that you're an athlete and someone pushing themselves athletically, and you view yourself like that, a weekend warrior, a recreational sport goer, athlete, a mum, dad, grandparent who just wants to be better and improve their quality of life, and improve and extend their longevity of life, and have more experiences with their children and their grandchildren. The other side of it is people who are looking to build businesses in the physio and the healthcare world, and do it differently and do it better, and not be heavily reliant on insurance, and not be caught in the trap of constantly working in the business, and sort of, I want to teach through my experiences of how you can go from in the business to working on the business, and the challenges that come along with that. And then I want to talk about being a dad. I want to talk about life. I want to talk about everything, really. So I'm pleased and I'm very grateful if you've got to this stage. I'm impressed that this is the first drink that I've needed. But if you are interested, like I said earlier, please follow, please share, please subscribe, please comment. Let me know what you want to see, provide me with any feedback. And I'm looking forward to recording a few of these and setting the Move standard and improving the cadence of that.